Welcome to the webinar. I'm here with Commissioner Melanie Loizum. We'll get going in a couple minutes as we let people in.
Just a note, if there are Climate Council members on here, we will be promoting you to panelists. So if you see that invitation come up, please accept. It doesn't mean that you have to chime in just yet, but we do want to make sure that you're able to participate in the Q&A.
Molly, if you want to let me know when it looks like we have most of our members, if we want to get going in a minute or two.
Yep, let's give it another 30 seconds or so, and then it looks like we do have a critical mass.
And Molly, is there any, before we kick it off, any housekeeping people can direct questions or comments to you and Artie?
Folks can use the chat to chat with hosts, with the folks up here on the screen. So if you have technical issues or questions, please send us a message in the chat and we will try to respond to you right away. And we'll also be putting some links in the chat to documents and web pages that are referenced during the webinar.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Loizum, I am screen sharing and we'll hopefully make it work. But if I mess it up, just tell me to go forward or backward.
All right. Well, it looks like we probably have a critical mass. The number of people joining us has slowed down. So we'll go ahead and get going with this afternoon's meeting of the Maine Climate Council. Thank you all for joining us today. If you missed it, Molly Siegel did mention that if you are a Maine Climate Council member, please bring yourself to her attention and she'll promote you to a panelist. We will have an opportunity for our council members to engage with us in a question and answer at the end of our presentation. I'm Melanie Loizum, Commissioner of the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, joined today by Director Hannah Pingree, Director of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future and co-chair of the Maine Climate Council. Before we get started, I do want to give a shout out to all of the staff in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, and particularly Amalia Siegel for all the work that she's been doing. For those of you who are Climate Council members, you have probably seen quite a bit of material coming from her in the last couple of days. We have reached the stage of the Climate Council's work where we are really going to put you all to work now. You've spent a lot of time with our working groups. They've provided a tremendous list of new recommendations for us to consider as an update to the next 4-year climate action plan. So many thanks to all the people that participated in that process. There's a lot of public input that we are in the process of receiving now and incorporating that into the recommendations as well. But you will see mine and Hannah's name attached to things, but really there is a tremendous amount of work being done in the background by Molly and the other members of the GoPIF team. So many thanks to those folks for everything they're contributing to this as well. All right. So today what we're going to do is we're going to give you an overview of the framework for the next Maine Won't Wait 2.0 Maine's Climate Action Plan. I think as we've told you before, this is going to be an update to the previous plan. So we're not making this from scratch again. We did some amazing work that culminated in the 2020 plan, and we are continuing to build on that. So many of the recommendations are new. Ultimately, we'll have some others that carry over from the previous plan. And what we're going to try to do for you today is give you what's kind of like the table of contents outline version of the plan. So this is still very much under development. There's going to be an opportunity for you all to give us some feedback on that. We'll be developing the chapters that are associated with each of the strategies that we're going to be presenting to you. So today is one of those things where we're going to talk a lot at you. We've sent you the framework in advance to take a look at, but think about it like this is the really high level, boiled up version. And what we're talking about is how to organize the ideas in a logical way. And one of the things that is readily apparent is there's a great deal of overlap. There are certain things that boil up consistently amongst all of the working groups, which includes that communities need more assistance and they need more support, that there is a lot of need for engagement, that there's a huge focus now after this winter storms on resiliency. And so there are some really common themes that we see occur across all of these recommendations. And so trying to figure out how to fit all the pieces together into a puzzle to make one cohesive picture that is well organized is the challenge that is in front of us right now. But some amazing recommendations that are going to be incredibly helpful to the state when we can actually put these into action. So thanks to everybody for your input on that. And then I think we will just go through a quick overview before we get into the details of that about the council in general. So I'm going to run through quickly some slides that you all have probably seen before. Nothing that you don't already know, that we are already seeing the impacts from climate change here in Maine. We are experiencing warmer temperatures, more precipitation, shorter winters, and rising sea levels. There's absolutely no doubt that things are shifting in our climatic experience here in Maine, and that we are feeling the impacts of that, and our communities need to be prepared to deal with that moving forward. We do a biennial emissions inventory and measure our emissions against our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We consistently find that the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions are the result of the combustion of fossil fuels. And when we look at where those fossil fuels are being combusted, it is still primarily from the transportation sector, and then next from our own homes. So the transportation sector and the residential sector are absolutely the largest contributors consistently to greenhouse gas emissions in Maine, followed by commercial, industrial, and then the electric power sector. The Climate Council is made up of 6 working groups and 2 subcommittees. And again, I want to thank everybody who's been participating in these working groups and these subcommittees over the spring and summer in particular. There's some tremendous work that's been done, great collaboration, and a lot of really good new ideas that have come forward, and also a good refocus on some things that we identified as priorities previously. And it has been really important, particularly to include the work of the Equity Subcommittee. Equity wasn't one of the things that was originally included when the Maine Climate Council was created and began our work many years ago now, but was identified early in the process as something that was important to include in the council's work. And we have been incorporating across all of the working groups and the sectors that we've been talking about. So just a reminder of our overarching goals. So this is the slide that sort of represents the charge to the Maine Climate Council. Every 4 years, we need to produce a plan. Our first major plan was in December of 2020. Every 4 years thereafter, we update the recommendations for the actions the state should take. So our next target is December 1st of 2024, which is coming in the very near future. All of the recommendations that go into that plan are intended to help us meet our emission reduction targets, which are reducing greenhouse gas emissions 45% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. We also have a target to achieve state carbon neutrality by 2045. And in addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, also a very important goal for the work of the Climate Council is to ensure that Maine people, industries, and communities are resilient to the impacts of climate change, which is one of the things that we have felt most keenly in the last year. And so our overarching goals, again, are to reduce Maine's greenhouse gas emissions, to make the state more resilient to the impacts of climate change, because we're not going to prevent it from happening at this point. We are already experiencing it, so we need to be prepared for it. But the things that we do as a state should also give us the opportunity to foster economic growth and prosperity. And then ultimately, we want to advance equity in all of the work that we do across the council's recommendations and our actions. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Hannah.
Great. Well, thank you, Melanie. That was an excellent introduction. Again, for those on the webinar who are Climate Council members, you've seen these slides before, but we're really, we've all gone through a Maine summer. Hopefully everybody got a break, and we're now trying to get you in the mode for this framework. Again, Melanie did a great job talking about how much hard work the staff has done, and I'm going to just remind you of where we are in the process. So again, as Melanie laid out, we have 6 Climate Council working groups. We had 2 other groups working on waste management, materials management, as well as land use, in addition to our 2 subcommittees. So starting in September 2023, we really kicked off this Climate Council planning process to work towards the December 1 deadline for the next state climate action plan. We've had more than 100 meetings, and it's probably terrible to measure your progress in meetings, but these meetings really are hundreds of people, lots of citizens, people who are advocacy groups, small business owners, municipal officials. Over 200 working group members have spent not just hundreds, but thousands of hours engaging in the strategies that we're going to talk to you about today. You heard about them in June, and again, now we are presenting them to you as a cohesive strategy. So where are we in the process? Melanie reminded you of the last time we delivered the first climate action plan under this legal framework. Again, we have started this process in May of 2023. We spent last fall through the spring, the working groups and subcommittees working on strategies and recommendations, again, starting with the Science and Technical Subcommittee, the science and data of where we are. All of the working groups working on specific strategies. They delivered them to the full Climate Council in June. And now in September, we are here where we are today talking about the framework. We are doing lots of public engagement throughout the month of September. We will be meeting September 25th as a Climate Council in person to really start to deliberate on these strategies to deliver a plan by December 1 of this year. Just a reminder, we are out on the road. This is a bit of a promotional point. Hoping also Climate Council members continue to join us for these meetings. Tonight, we are in Lewiston at the Lewiston Public Library at 6 p.m. We'd love anyone to join us. We were in Presque Isle last week. And again, we have more meetings coming up throughout the course of this month. Portland, Bangor, Ellsworth, Biddeford. These are about an hour-and-a-half long meetings. We promise that it is not just Melanie and I talking. It is a brief overview of the climate plan, and then we really sit down in small groups and we hear from people about what strategies are most important to them, what makes sense, what's relevant, what concerns do they have. So we are gathering input from lots of people across the state about this climate action plan as we put it together and again deliberate with the full Climate Council. We also have a survey. So if you can't show up at one of these meetings, you're busy, you can tell us what you think online. So if you can look at this QR code, or you can just get there by going to our website, maine.gov/future. You can find all the Climate Council information. We've had lots of people weigh in so far, give specific ideas, prioritize what strategies would make the most sense for their community. So we want to hear from you. So again, Melanie did a good overview of what this draft framework is. We're not here. Melanie and I did not write all these strategies. As you know, hundreds of people have engaged in them. The co-chairs of our working groups really worked hard and led, and we're going to provide you the quick overview. I'm not even going to read, all the words on each of these PowerPoint screens, but we're trying to get the Climate Council through this just 1 hour webinar. Sort of, we want to get you thinking about the framework that we're going to come together and talk about later this month. I think it's also an important moment for the public to just see how this plan's coming together. I think a lot of things will look familiar, but there are many new strategies that have come, and we are looking at how they fit together and what makes sense for Maine. So again, this integrates all the working group and task force recommendations. This does not yet include targets based on emissions modeling. We are that is actively underway. We have a really talented group who is helping the state of Maine with emissions modeling. It is a science that we want to get right. We are working with each of our co-chairs of the working groups on this emissions modeling. We have a webinar in October to present the results. And so you will see a few places where we almost have blanks, like numbers coming based on whether it's the number of EVs on the road, the number of heat pumps installed. We have emission targets, as Melanie talked about, in law. We have to reduce emissions. We have to create a plan that reduces emissions by 45% by 2030. And so the modeling is set up to make sure that the science and the actual emission reductions match. Again, this is a framework today. This is sort of the beginning of the process of sharing with the Climate Council how we could put this together. This is out now for everyone's engagement. I will say, as we go through the strategies, you will see a lot that's familiar. We think that Maine Won't Wait was a good model. It was clear the public and communities could sort of see where they fit. They could see where the themes of emissions reduction, resilience, our environment all fit in. So a lot is similar. Again, strategies A, B, and C have the same titles. We have a big focus again on jobs and the economy. E and F are somewhat the same. We have folded in strategy G, which used to be about infrastructure, into strategy F about building healthy and resilient communities. The infrastructure of communities didn't really make sense to be separate from communities themselves. And so then strategy G is about engaging Maine people. So a lot of similarities. I will say Commissioner Loism co-chaired a group on materials management, thinking about waste strategies. We also had a land use working group. We did debate, and you'll see as we go through these slides, whether we create 2 more specific strategies for waste and land use. And we can debate it at our meeting on the 25th. We decided that many of the recommendations, all the recommendations that came out of those 2 time limited groups made sense to fold in to our current structure. Some of them you'll see healthy and resilient communities has a lot of things in it now. But again, I think in Maine, we know a lot of work happens at the local and regional level. So it did make sense to think about land use, think about waste issues as they relate to Maine's communities. So I'm going to just go through the first couple strategies and then hand it back to Melanie. Again, I won't read all the words on the slides, but I'll just try to present to you, again, the framework. We called it this is a more exciting table of contents that you'll see, but what each of the strategies now looks like. So again, embrace the future of transportation. I think as again, Melanie pointed out, this is an incredibly important strategy for our emission reduction goals. Transportation, again, is nearly half of our state's carbon emissions. So 3 strategies coming out of the transportation working group. 1, to accelerate Maine's transition to battery and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. This strategy looks similar to what was in Maine Won't Wait 4 years ago, but has many more specifics about how do we target EVs for low and moderate income drivers in Maine? How do we ensure charging? How do we lower the cost of vehicles in our state? How do we provide education so that people understand how this could make sense for them and their community? In a similar way, we are advancing a strategy we had in the last plan for zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles. So we had something about piloting in the last plan, but we really continued to move to how do we support pilots more actively, for buses, for ferries, for helping businesses with fleets. How do we support a policy in this area? We are simultaneously, with funding from the EPA, doing a roadmap for medium and heavy duty vehicles. That will be done in November, and we plan to incorporate some of the specifics into this plan. And a lot of conversation about how do we ensure that we are reducing vehicle miles traveled. This is a strategy with a lot of components, because reducing vehicle miles traveled can be land use policies, can be shared transportation, public transportation, active transportation, bike trails, walking. So the working group did a ton of work in this area, and it has a number of robust strategies underneath it. Next, strategy B, modernize Maine's buildings. Again, this has a lot of similarities and is an important strategy for Maine, where we have a lot of older homes, and also an area where we have led through the adoption of high efficiency heat pumps. So the first strategy is really to continue that progress, to continue to lead the country, to make our homes and businesses more energy efficient through weatherization and heating systems. So a lot here to just continue the good work we are doing, but make sure that we are doubling down to ensure that the benefits of energy efficiency, weatherization, heat pumps, and other technologies are accessible to all Maine people. Lots of talk, and this was also in the last climate plan, about ensuring that new buildings that we build in Maine are highly energy efficient. So we want to ensure that we don't have to go back and weatherize the new homes, the new businesses built in Maine. So a lot on energy codes. Promotion and manufacture of climate-friendly building products is a huge opportunity for our economy. We know Maine is a state that leads in forest products. We know that this is an area where we can do a lot more. So the working group recommended a variety of strategies to continue and grow how we use climate-friendly building products in the buildings we build in Maine, and also as an export to the region. We also, all of the working groups, again, as Melanie said, you will see a resilience theme. So support measures that both reduce carbon emissions and improve resilience. So this can be through technologies like solar and storage, but also ensuring buildings are ready for the kinds of storms and climate impacts, whether they are heat or floods or wind events that we know have already arrived and will continue to increase in our state. Continued progress also needed in the industrial sector. Melanie showed the slide of industrial emissions. We have had good progress made by some of the largest companies in Maine, but ensuring we are supporting our largest manufacturing facilities, especially in taking advantage of new technologies to both reduce costs, but also reduce emissions. And a continuation of the lead by example in publicly funded buildings. We're going a little deeper in this climate plan with a lot of excitement about the opportunities in schools, continuing to build on the incredible work happening across the state in local governments, in municipal, regional, and city governments, and continuing the progress in state buildings. We know the state does need to continue to lead the way. And a new strategy that is similar to lead by example, but we see a tremendous opportunity, especially with the federal funds coming into Maine, to both build more housing, a top priority across all kinds of issue areas, including climate in our state, but ensure that new housing and our current affordable housing sector is highly energy efficient and built in areas where people work and live. So next, strategy C, transition to clean energy. The energy working group, I think, came up with 4 strategies. They are, again, somewhat similar, but really double down on some specific themes. Decrease energy burdens while transitioning to clean energy. So major focus on how do we ensure this exciting transition to clean energy does not overly burden Maine ratepayers. So lots of ideas and specifics about how to get there. Additionally, we have aggressive goals to get to 100% clean energy in our state by 2040. That doesn't just happen. It happens with lots of specific policies to ensure that we are doing this in a smart way and an affordable way, and to ensure that our grid is prepared for this transition. Additionally, managing the impact of the electrification that really were part of strategy A and B. So the transition to an electrified transportation and vehicle and building sector requires increased innovation in how we manage our homes, manage our electricity grid for this new load. And last but not least, grow Maine's clean energy economy with a goal to support 30,000 clean energy jobs. This was a goal the governor set after we put the climate plan out, an incredibly exciting one that ensures that Maine people see the opportunity in this transition to clean energy. And that last strategy really leads well into one of the major goals of our climate plan, which is to ensure economic opportunity for the people of the state of Maine in our climate response. So this strategy we will build out. It takes pieces from all of the working groups' work about how do we ensure that we have the workforce to do the work of climate? How do we see good paying jobs across our state? And how do we grow innovation and new businesses to support Maine's climate response? There's already so much good work happening across our state, from our climate core to what's happening at our higher education institutions, community colleges, career and technical centers at high schools. So we see a ton of opportunity here, and we are excited to really roll this up into part of our climate plan. So I'm going to pass it back to Melanie to walk you through the other half of the state's climate plan overview framework.
Thanks, Hannah. So next we're going to talk about protecting Maine's environment, working lands and waters, and increasing resiliency. Maine's natural and working lands and waters absorb carbon from the atmosphere, provide clean drinking water, sustain wildlife habitat, and help mitigate flooding, among other benefits. Our working lands support our farming, forestry, and outdoor recreation industries. Our coastal waters support fisheries and tourism industries that anchor the economic life of many Maine communities. So this strategy provides actions and targets that protect, restore, and will provide resilience for Maine's ecosystems and the natural resource industries that depend on them. As in 2020, the Climate Council will continue the work towards 30% of natural and working lands in Maine to be conserved by 2030. This recommendation encourages protecting areas of cultural, economic, and ecological importance, including farmland. Also, as in our 2020 plan, this recommendation aims to increase the amount of food consumed in Maine from state food producers to 30% by 2030 by creating a made food plan and bolstering in-state food production. And to reduce food loss and waste 50% by 2030, which is a big and new goal that we're adding as a result of the Materials Management Task Force. We also want to develop new incentives to increase carbon storage. This recommendation highlights the need to provide incentives and technical assistance to forest landowners to encourage climate-friendly forest practices, which will help us meet our carbon neutrality goal. On the coastal and marine side, we need to support climate adaptation of Maine's fisheries, aquaculture, and seafood industries by supporting resilient ecosystems and helping people and businesses in these industries adapt to a changing Gulf of Maine. And we also need to monitor, conserve, and increase the resilience of our coastal and marine ecosystems. Finally, as recommended by the Materials Management Task Force, this strategy encourages reducing and capturing methane emissions from Maine's waste sector, primarily through incentives to keep high methane producing materials out of our landfills. And as Director Pingree mentioned, under our resilience working group, this is an area where we have many new recommendations and a great deal of focus. Communities have made strides in understanding their exposure to climate threats and taking proactive steps to become more resilient. There is so much more work to do as the storms, floods, winds, and dry spells of the past 2 years have shown. More than ever, communities need funding, tools, and support to address climate impacts and overlapping challenges of aging infrastructure, needs for affordable housing, public health, and so much more. This strategy is intended to provide actionable steps for how the state and local governments can build resilience and prepare for the impacts of climate change, with a particular focus on individuals and communities that are the most vulnerable. This strategy contains recommendations related to land use planning, emphasizing how Maine can encourage compact development to reduce existing and avoid future transportation emissions, ensure adequate clean energy resources to meet the state's energy needs, and protect natural and working lands and reduce climate risks, all in the context of Maine's housing crisis and growth opportunities. Next slide. So this first recommendation is to increase local capacity for climate resilience, whether it's through expanding information networks, helping communities plan to get out of harm's way, expanding grants and assistance, managing storm debris, increasing local government capacity. These are all key to improving climate resilience, particularly in our small and rural communities. Next is to enhance the state's ability to prepare for and recover from natural disasters. In order to support our communities, the state can facilitate planning at all levels and measure the effectiveness and equity of adaptation and resilience actions proposed by this plan. The next recommendation is to expand access to funding and financing for climate adaptation and emissions reduction. This includes establishing a resilience bank to fund climate-ready infrastructure projects, making grant application processes more accessible, and ensuring long-term funding for the goals outlined in the plan. Next is to strengthen public health monitoring, education, and prevention. This includes actions to improve air quality in homes and address extreme heat using shared community infrastructure such as emergency warming and cooling centers and tree planting. It also includes continuing to monitor water quality for any potential increase in waterborne illnesses due to climate change. On the subject of health, this section specifically points to the mental health impacts of climate change and the additional mental health support and resources, that are needed in the context of climate change and extreme weather events. We've heard from many young people that mental health is a huge concern, and these actions focus on building resiliency, agency, and hope, particularly for those who are most vulnerable. The next few recommendations focus on land use strategies that foster vibrant communities while meeting conservation, housing, resilience, and energy goals. First is to promote smart growth to reduce emissions, prevent natural and working land conversion, and create affordable housing. Next is to build healthy and resilient coastal communities and protect critical place-based infrastructure. This focuses on protecting working waterfront infrastructure and access in coastal communities that face development pressures and sea level rise. We also recommend to provide technical assistance to communities and use proactive communication and engagement to support effective land use planning. This is all about supporting communities to have the sometimes difficult conversations around land use, encouraging proactive messaging, and using local engagement to build consensus. This strategy focuses on incentives and regulations that can help achieve the land use goals mentioned in the previous slides. Again, our goals are to reduce emissions, foster vibrant communities, reduce sprawl, and provide measurable benefits. And then these last two recommendations are about reducing emissions through the management of materials and waste, an area that we did not address in the last climate action plan. First is to advance policies and deploy funding to reduce emissions across product life cycles by growing Maine's circular economy. This means encouraging reuse, refill, repair to reduce consumption and waste, both in our homes and our businesses and in state facilities. And the final recommendation in this section is to regionalize and scale up access to waste prevention and diversion services. This means ensuring that communities have the resources to deal with waste and materials and to keep materials out of landfills whenever possible. So our next set of recommendations is about engaging with Maine people and communities. Effective communication about Maine's climate strategies is critical to the success of our climate plan. We've learned a lot over the past 4 years, particularly through our engagement with young people and with underrepresented groups. So these recommendations are still in progress and will include updates on climate education in schools since the publication of Maine Won't Wait. It will also include details on how the Maine Climate Council and other state agencies can continue to engage with diverse communities about climate impacts, program opportunities, and planning, as we've been doing the past few months through our travels around the state, which Director Pingree mentioned earlier. So we want to look at some examples from 2020 that are some things we had in the last plan that we've already completed and that you're not going to see in the next plan because these are things that we have actually accomplished, like implementing the appliance efficiency standards, adopting a phase down of hydrofluorocarbons, inventorying our carbon stocks on our land and coastal areas. And so there's a lot from our 2020 plan that we have accomplished that you're not going to see repeated in the next plan because those are things that we have done. But there are plenty of things from the 2020 plan that are still ongoing efforts that we're working on identifying what we want to continue to bring forward as part of the 2024 plan, or that we recognize are well underway and don't need to be repeated in the next plan, because the plan is really about thinking about steps for actions to be taken in the next 4 years. So we want to acknowledge that there are some recommendations that we're not going to be updating, but we will be working with the council in the coming months to identify how we want to do this. So let's see. Our next set of meetings after this are going to be September 25th, where we're going to have a full council meeting. So we've just talked a lot at you. We just went through a whole lot of slides. We rattled through the framework of recommendations that we just sent to you last night. It is an awful lot to try to take in, and we recognize that. And we're going to give you a little bit of time for the council members to try to ask us some questions and give us some feedback on that. But really, September 25th is going to be our in-person meeting where we're going to have time to have really substantive conversations about these things. Then on October 16th, we'll have an opportunity to talk about the emissions modeling. And then the next couple of subsequent meetings after that are really when we distill this down into a final plan. And so I don't know that we want to go through any more of the detail at this point, or if we want to turn it over to give the folks from the council an opportunity to ask us some questions about what we've just rattled off to them really quick fire. Oh, look, everybody's hidden. They turned all their cameras off.
They're eating their lunch. But thank you. We thank them for bearing with us. And I will say this is this is a framework. We're not really debating the policy yet. We're just thinking about how we're going to organize it and what might be missing. And obviously, as Melanie said, and we talked about our public engagement, we're still out asking people for priorities and things that may be missing. Oh, good. I'm no longer my whole Zoom screen. That's great news. I see Jody from Department of Agriculture, Conservation, Forestry.
Thank you. And this is great. I'm very excited about what I just heard and such a huge amount of work. I had a question around knowing that all the details in each of the work groups recommendations, there's no way to put them into a framework. Is one of the goals to have the narrative that accompanies the recommendations capture as much of that detail as possible? I found that to be useful in the 2020 plan.
I can try to answer, and I'm also going to look to Molly, who's been working with staff teams on some of that. We do imagine a very similar narrative as Maine Won't Wait, just in terms of like describing all the things that are happening, broadly describing the strategies that incorporate the science and technical subcommittee information as it relates to each sector. I do think so. For everyone's point of view, Jody worked closely on the natural working lands work. There was a lot in the 2020 plan. There's a lot of really good sort of focus in the recommendations that came out of the work group. And so we will be spending the next month working back and forth with you about the language, the narrative, and what's included in that chapter. So I don't know, Molly, or Melanie, if you have anything you want to add, but I think Jody, your exact point is exactly what we are grappling with here.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Anne? Anne Fuchs? Oh, she figured out how to raise her hand. Come on, Anne.
Can she unmute herself, Molly? Maybe it's a...
She says she's
Oh, there
not
she
able
is.
to.
Oh, I just
There
did
she
it.
did.
Oh,
She did
great.
it.
Did it.
Congrats.
Yes, thank you. I'm so sorry. There was some technological challenge there, but I just wanted to offer like reasons for silence right now on behalf of myself, at least, is certainly just because it was a lot of information that was just presented. And from my perspective, I'm looking forward to just taking the time to ingest this information, compare it to what our working groups work so hard to bring to the table, and then offer some quality feedback. But thank you very much for taking the time to present this to all of us. It certainly kind of helps to start things resonating, if you will, because there's a lot of content here. So thank you.
I'm seeing in the chat both Senator Stacey Brenner and Climate Council member Francis Eanes both have questions. So
It looks like they both need to be promoted, so just give me a
nope,
moment
there's
and they should
Francis
pop up.
made it in, so we'll let him go first, and then we'll get Stacey in here as well. So if you're out there, Joyce Taylor also wants to be promoted. So
great to be back on the team. Thanks, everybody. And thank you so much for all this work. This is an insane amount of work and deeply appreciative of all of the state trotting you all are doing. Excited to hopefully see folks tonight in Lewiston. I've been promoting the word here locally. My question was around the growing our clean energy economy and jobs, and deeply appreciate, I think, really calling out this as a core cross-cutting strategy. You know, we can't do the buildings, the resilience, all that stuff without thinking through holistically the business side, the workforce development side. That's all awesome. I think my question was, is there an opportunity to maybe flesh this out a little bit more? I noticed that there's, deep detail and energy in other parts of this plan, but maybe a little thinner here on the jobs. And so very excited to help with that. I know there's a lot of other partners here in this work that could join that. And I think a point within that would be just really trying to lift up this question of job quality, even as we grow total jobs. Just to maybe put a finer point on it, last week or a week and a half ago, some of you might have seen there was this awful accident of a worker on a solar farm in Surrey up in the mid-coast getting electrocuted. This is sadly a fairly typical thing, maybe more extreme than happens, but just, out-of-state worker hired by a third-party contractor, hired by, on down the line. And this is just, typical for the solar industry nationally. Maine is not at all unique. And so, just lifting up job quality, safety, workforce development standards that really make sure workers feel empowered to say no when things are not being done right. This is all a key piece of how we can actually grow our workforce at the pace that we need and like retain folks in these fields that are so badly under-resourced. So really excited to keep, moving this conversation forward. Deeply appreciate the spirit of what is here.
Great, Francis, thank you. And I know we look forward to more of your thoughts on that. I would say we are looking at the last climate plan had a lot of robust detail. The job and economy things are sort of spread out across every working group. Nearly every working group said something about workforce needed, lots of different economic opportunities also laid out. So I think we're pulling the strategy kind of to really highlight what we're seeing across the entire plan. And then I think obviously good quality jobs, the safety of jobs are good things to also highlight. Just to be clear, we're talking about framework here today. We'll give the whole Climate Council a lot of words that you will have the opportunity to kind of really, we won't do group copy editing, but you'll have the opportunity to say like what's missing and what even words you are concerned about. So I'm going to sign you up to help with that and really appreciate your comment. I know Stacy had Senator Brenner had a comment as well.
Thank you, Director Pingree and Commissioner Loisem, as always. So much good work. My question gets to a concern around grid expansion and the historic pushback we've seen in the state from residents when we have expansion projects come forward. I didn't see anything specific in the plan, and maybe it's coming later in specifics around community engagement and education around what it's going to look like and what it's going to take to expand the grid.
I see at least Ken Coburn out there and Molly. I will say the land use working group, we actually had a fair amount about just land use conflicts. How do we build denser housing? How do we build transmission and clean energy, but also meet our goals of conservation? So I would say that is an excellent point that we want to ensure is highlighted. I don't know, Ken, if there was specific debate the energy working group had about how to ensure that we can permit and build the energy resources we need. And if I missed that bullet, sorry, but I see Ken to help weigh in on that because a very, very relevant topic.
This is an important question, but happily, due to the nature of the grid and the way we use energy, the grid is already capable, because it was designed to meet peaks. If we use storage constructively and demand management constructively, we can already send about twice as much energy as we use now through the existing grid. Now, there are certain places that need to be beefed up, but as a whole, the grid is capable of doing double time what it is now. We may need to harden some areas for resilience as well, but the grid as a whole is not the volume of the grid. Its capability is not a problem until we about double our energy consumption. When we electrify everything, we'll probably exceed double. So, Senator, your question is an important one, even though it's probably not the current most timely one. If we don't manage that stuff well, then we indeed need to start building tomorrow. So, thanks.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you for being there to help. And Stacy, we lost you for a second, so I don't know if you heard that whole answer, but we've recorded it and the slides are available. And again, to just remind everyone, all of the 20, 30, 40 page working group reports are also available on our website. So there's a lot of detail that came out of the working groups that we're looking to kind of pull into this framework of recommendations. So today we're really talking about the organization of them, but it's definitely a very relevant time to talk about what's missing. So. All right. Anything, we have Judy East.
Thanks, Hannah. So echoing just how extraordinary this work is to pull all of this amount of detail together. I know it's really, really a challenge. And I think you've done an amazing job. So with that, you asked for things that are missing, and I feel like I don't want to be a critic after all that's been done, but two things that I felt might be missing, and maybe they'll be in the detail. One is in the area of natural and working lands, the land protection efforts do focus on high biodiversity, high carbon storage, sequestration, cultural and economic importance, and all of that makes sense, as well as public access. It does not specifically call out accommodation for marsh migration, which I think is a really critical piece in terms of preparing for sea level rise over time. So that's just one thing I noticed. It might come out in the detail. And then you didn't present on the measuring progress section, but in the framework, the metrics reference the text indicates that it's critical to measure our progress towards meeting the targets in terms of emissions reduction, but it doesn't reference metrics for resilience. And so I'm sure that will come up. I hope it will come up, but I didn't see that at all. So otherwise, extraordinary. Thanks.
Judy, very helpful, and the marsh migration is helpful, and I will say that we are other sections of this plan are going to be incorporated, the implementation, the funding, and the metrics. And I think as the Climate Council knows, we've really tried to ensure that we have metrics that we can be accountable to and that we report on every year. And this climate plan will help report on the last year. But Judy, as your working group recommended, thinking about metrics for resilience is important, and that we will ensure that that recommendation does get folded into the metrics section. We've had a public question of how exactly is the Climate Council incorporating public input with the in-person listening sessions into the Climate Council recommendations. And I will say, we are again out on the road right now and getting specific feedback, ideas, concerns. We had a Zoom session where we did something similar, and we also were working with the Mitchell Center to gather their full report, where they really reached out to a variety of different disadvantaged populations. All of that feedback is going to be presented to the Maine Climate Council on September 25th. The raw comments, volumes, but also a high-level presentation on the themes, the concerns, and the ideas we heard. It will then be up to the Climate Council on the September 25th to deliberate and to say, okay, something was pointed out to us. We were missing this item. We heard about this in Aroostook County. We heard about it in Lewiston. There was a lot of concern about how something could be implemented. We'll share that with the Climate Council. So we will share comments. We will share sort of broad themes, but we will share the details as well. So that will be fully transparent about what people said, ideas, things that people don't like, and we will be sure to have the Climate Council understand those concerns as we make decisions about what's next. Anything else, Melanie or Molly? We're now down to just 5 minutes to go, and I know that folks joined us during their lunch break. Melanie, Ken posted a comment. Do you want to read that? Just because I think Ken he wants to get it right.
Sure. All right. So Ken has added a note in response to Senator Brenner's question that one aspect of grid does need improvement in the short term, interconnection of distributed energy resources. Some of this is technical and hardware, but a lot of it's function and policy, which can be implemented more quickly and cost effectively. So it's great to see folks already ready to engage on some of the details about this, which is wonderful, and we encourage you to do so. Given that we are close to the end of our time and we shoehorned you all in again on your lunch break, so many thanks for you taking the time between 12 and 1 to listen to us about all of this and to get ready to do a lot of reading and studying up. I did mention earlier, and I think Director Pingree has said as well, September 25th is our next meeting in person. If you're able to attend as a Climate Council member, this will really be the meeting where we have the opportunity to start to dig into the details and give some really substantive feedback to the staff team and to Hannah and I about what modifications we should be making to what's going into the next plan. So you've got the framework to think about, and then all the additional details that we'll all be discussing. Then we're going to line those recommendations up against what kind of emission reductions we think we can achieve with those recommendations on October 16th. Our emissions modeling team has been spending a lot of time building the model so that we can plug these recommendations into that model and make adjustments as needed to meet our emission target. So admittedly, we had hoped that we would have been able to start turning the dials on that a little bit sooner, but building out a model that is actually able to try to incorporate all the socioeconomic factors as well as just basic emission factors is quite a build for them. So we'll have that October 16th. And then on October 23rd, we will have our next big Climate Council meeting to try to really finalize where we're all comfortable with in terms of the recommendations, get the last truly substantive input from everybody with a final target of having the plan released on November 21st. So this is it. This is the big stretch for all the actual council members. The working groups have done a lot for all of us, and now it's all of your turn to really buckle down, read up, look at what you're going to get from Molly in your emails coming over the next couple of months. Study up. I will continue to emphasize that we really appreciate everybody's contribution, but it does mean that there are times when it does require some work from everybody. But I know that we can all do it, and we can come up with a good consensus output as a result of this that's going to be good for our, not only preparing for climate change, but good for our economy as well.
Trying to get to the next slide. Now we have a couple of promotional items, Melanie.
All right. So Hannah, you might want to add to this, but we do have this fun Climate and Me Art Challenge for engaging with the younger members of Maine citizenry. So if you're a Mainer between the ages of 9 and 22, or if you know somebody who is, one of the parts of the plan that you'll see is sort of placeholders in the next couple of iterations are some places for artwork, for stories. There are a lot of those really fun, tangible details about the first version of Maine Won't Wait. That Maine Won't Wait 2020 plan that you got had these amazing images, this kind of true participation from the people of the state of Maine. And in particular, we want to put an emphasis on engaging our youth in the state. And so this is an opportunity to do that. I'm saying a lot so that I'm hoping that you're all taking a picture of this so that you and others that you know who might qualify could participate, because it's awesome having the input from Maine's youth as part of our planning, because this is really about making Maine a better place for all of them to live in the future. And then finally, if you could all make sure you've got this on your calendar to be aware that we're going to be having these public meetings. As Director Pingree noted, Several of these has been completed already. Heard great feedback coming out of Presque Isle. They were very appreciative of having the opportunity to directly engage, to have members of the community in Northern Maine be given a forum to participate. And so Director Pingree will be in Lewiston tonight. I'll be in Portland on the 12th, and then she and I will be tag teaming, taking our turns in Bangor, Ellsworth, and Biddeford next week. One of the things that we've heard loud and clear about participating in the Maine Climate Council is that we're trying to give people every opportunity possible to weigh into the plan. This is a plan that is relevant to every person in the state for a variety of reasons, depending on where you live, determines how you're affected by climate change, but everyone is affected. And so we're making every effort to provide webinars like this, Zoom forums, in-person forums, lots of public meetings, the surveys, every way that the people of the state of Maine can weigh in and give us input into the next plan that we're going to be developing, that will be used to help guide legislative choices, budget choices, the governor's choices, that all of the input that we're getting from everybody really is being reviewed by all of the staff, by Director Pingree and I, and is really important for helping us try to frame something that is going to be the plan for the whole state moving forward. So thank you all for the time you've taken. I already hit the Q&A, and I think we might have to just say goodbye at this point because I think we're 2 minutes over. Hannah, you have anything else?
No, huge thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Climate Council members. Good to see you. And as Melanie said, lots more coming. So go to bed early. Thanks all. Thanks.
Thank you.